Captain Jack Reed wiped the sweat from his brow as he pushed deeper into the ancient ruins. The pale blue light of his scanner cast eerie shadows on the dusty walls. For 3 weeks, his team had been digging through this place, hoping to find something, anything, that might give humanity an edge in the stars. The ruins sat on a lonely moon at the edge of human space. Most of Reed's colleagues thought it was a waste of time. Just another dead alien city, they said. But Reed felt something calling him here, a pull he couldn't explain. "Captain, it's getting late," came Jones' voice through his comm. The rest of the team headed back to camp. "Just 30 more minutes," Reed replied, running his gloved hand along a wall covered in strange symbols. "I need to check this section." The wall suddenly gave way under his touch, revealing a hidden chamber beyond. Reed steadied himself, heart pounding as his light shone into the darkness. Unlike the dusty ruins outside, this room looked untouched by time. In its center floated a small crystal pedestal, glowing with a soft inner light. Reed approached carefully. When his scanner touched the crystal, it flashed brightly, projecting images into the air around him. His eyes widened as he understood what he was seeing. Blueprints, ship designs unlike anything humans had ever built. 3 days later, Reed sat in his quarters aboard the survey ship, staring at the data crystal he'd smuggled off the moon. The ship's computer had translated enough of the alien language to confirm his suspicions. These weren't just any ship designs. They were plans for a warship with technology centuries beyond current human capabilities. A ship that could harness the power of stars themselves. Reed had reported finding minor artifacts, but kept the true discovery to himself. The Alliance would either lock the plans away forever or build the ship as a weapon to control their own people. Neither option sat well with him. The galaxy was changing. The Dominion Empire grew stronger each year, swallowing up worlds at the edge of human space. 3 colonies had gone silent in the past month alone. The official reports claimed natural disasters, but Reed had friends who told different stories. Stories of Dominion warships that appeared without warning, of entire cities turned to ash. The Alliance leadership refused to see the truth. They talked of peace while the enemy prepared for war. Reed opened a secure channel to the only people he still trusted. First, Tom Miller, the best engineer in the Alliance and Reed's oldest friend. Then Dr. Mary Wilson, a brilliant physicist who had been pushed out of the Alliance Science Division for her dangerous ideas. Finally, Marcus White, a young science officer with a talent for solving impossible problems. "I found something," Reed told them, his voice low. "Something that could change everything. But I can't do this through official channels." They met on a remote station 2 weeks later. Reed showed them the plans and watched their faces shift from doubt to amazement. "This is impossible," Miller whispered, examining the engine designs. "The power requirements alone would." "I've run the numbers," Wilson cut in. "It's not impossible. Difficult, yes. Revolutionary, absolutely, but not impossible." White nodded slowly. "The quantum mechanics are sound. Strange, but sound." "So you'll help me?" Reed asked. "Where would we even build such a thing?" Miller asked. "The Alliance monitors every shipyard." Reed pulled up a map of a distant asteroid belt. "There's an abandoned mining facility here. Remote, forgotten, but with all the basic equipment still intact. We can gather resources slowly, keep everything off the books." "This is treason, you know," Wilson said quietly. "If we're caught." Reed looked at each of them. "I've served the Alliance faithfully for 20 years. But something's coming. Something terrible. And when it does, we'll need more than treaties and good intentions to survive." They didn't answer right away. Reed understood their hesitation. They would be risking everything. Their careers, their freedom, possibly their lives. Finally, Miller nodded. "I'm in." "Me too," said White. Wilson sighed. "Someone has to make sure you don't blow up a star by accident." She smiled faintly. "I'm in." And so, in secret, they began. None of them knew then what they were truly building, or how its name would one day echo across the stars. The abandoned mining facility hung silently in the darkness of the asteroid belt. Once bustling with workers and machines, it had been left to drift when the ore ran dry 15 years ago. Now life returned to its empty halls. Tom Miller floated through the main hangar, directing drones as they moved materials into place. The engineer's face was lined with exhaustion, but his eyes burned with purpose. For 2 years, he had lived here, breathing recycled air and sleeping in cramped quarters while they built something that shouldn't exist. "The power couplings for Section 6 arrived," said Mary Wilson, pushing herself through the doorway with practiced ease. In the low gravity, her gray hair floated around her head like a cloud. "Quality is better than the last batch." Miller nodded. "Good. The core housing is almost ready." They had built the ship piece by piece, gathering materials from a dozen sources to avoid suspicion. Old parts repurposed, new components manufactured on-site, rare elements purchased through a network of trusted contacts. Slowly, the impossible took shape before them. The ship grew in the belly of the facility, larger than any vessel its class should be. Its hull was smooth and dark, absorbing light rather than reflecting it. The design was elegant but alien, following principles that sometimes made Miller's head hurt to contemplate. Reed spent most of his time managing their fragile supply chain and keeping Alliance patrols from taking too much interest in the abandoned facility. Today, he watched from an observation platform as the team prepared to install the quantum core, the heart of the ship and its most dangerous component. "Are we sure about this?" Marcus White asked, standing beside Reed. The young scientist had aged years during this project, his once round face now gaunt with worry. "The equations suggest that once activated, the core will establish connections we can't fully predict." "Too late to turn back now," Reed replied, watching as the cylindrical core was lowered into the center of the ship. "We've committed too much." The core installation took 18 hours of precise work. When it finally locked into place, the team gathered in the makeshift control room to run the first power test. 10% capacity only, Wilson reminded them, her fingers dancing across the control panel. "Just enough to confirm the pathways are stable." Miller nodded and began the startup sequence. Lights flickered across the facility as power flowed into the ship for the first time. On the monitors, energy readings spiked and then stabilized. "Power flow nominal," White said, his voice tight with concentration. "Core temperature stable. Field integrity at 98%. Reed allowed himself a small smile. After countless setbacks and near disasters, after 3 years of secret work, they were finally seeing results. Then the alarm started. "Power surge in the central node," Wilson shouted. "The core is drawing more energy than we're supplying." Miller's hands flew across the controls. "That's impossible. I'm cutting external power." But the ship continued to power up, core glowing brighter as if feeding from an unseen source. The vessel's hull began to resonate with a deep, almost musical hum that they felt in their bones. "It's tapping directly into the quantum field," White whispered, staring at his readings in disbelief. "Just like the blueprints said it would. But this soon." Before completion, Reed leaned forward, watching as systems they hadn't yet installed came online by themselves. Patterns of light raced across the ship's skin in geometric sequences. "It's integrating," Wilson said, "adapting. Almost like it's waking up," Reed finished. Miles away, at the edge of the asteroid belt, Lisa Parker sat alone in her small Alliance patrol ship. The intelligence officer had been tracking unusual resource movements for months, following a trail of suspicious transactions and missing equipment, all leading here to this supposedly abandoned facility. Parker's sensors detected the energy spike, brief but powerful enough to register even at this distance. She smiled tightly and began composing her report to headquarters. Whatever Reed and his team were building in there, it wouldn't remain secret much longer. Back in the facility, Reed watched as the ship powered down to standby mode, its systems stabilizing. The crisis had passed, But something fundamental had changed. This was no longer just a vessel they were constructing from alien blueprints. It was becoming something more. Marcus White couldn't sleep. The young scientist tossed in his narrow bunk, mind racing with calculations and strange dreams. Since the first power test 3 weeks ago, the ship had been doing things that weren't in the blueprints. Things that shouldn't be possible. He gave up on sleep and made his way to the observation deck. The ship hung in the center of the hangar, its dark hull absorbing the work lights around it. It looked complete now, sleek and predatory. But appearances were deceiving. "Can't sleep either?" Reed asked, startling White. The captain stood in the shadows, a cup of coffee in his hand. "The equations keep changing," White said. "Every time I think I understand how the quantum core works, shifts, like it's learning." Reed nodded. "Wilson said something similar yesterday. The navigation systems are writing their own code." They stood in silence, watching the ship. Neither wanted to say what they were both thinking. "We should run a full system test tomorrow," Reed finally said. "See exactly what we've built." The next morning, the entire team gathered in the control room. The atmosphere was tense as they prepared for the first full power activation. "All stations report ready," Miller said, his voice steady despite the dark circles under his eyes. He hadn't slept in 36 hours, making final adjustments to systems that kept changing without his input. "Begin power-up sequence," Reed ordered. As energy flowed into the ship, displays across the control room lit up with data. The quantum core activated, its energy signature pulsing like a heartbeat. "Core stable at 30%, Wilson reported. 50%. 70%. Full power achieved." For a moment, everything seemed normal. Then White noticed something on his monitor. "There's a data stream coming from the ship. I don't know what it's doing." The main screen flickered, lines of code scrolling faster than human eyes could follow. Then it cleared, showing a single word. "Rithikeoning." "Is that a name?" Miller whispered. Before anyone could respond, alarms blared throughout the facility. Not from the ship, but from their perimeter sensors. "We've got incoming," the security officer shouted. "Alliance patrol vessels, 6 of them. Heavy cruiser class. They're hailing us." Reed cursed under his breath. "How did they find us?" On the communications screen, Officer Lisa Parker's face appeared. "Captain Jack Reed. By authority of Earth Alliance Command, you are ordered to surrender yourself and all personnel. The unauthorized vessel you have constructed is now Alliance property." Reed cut the transmission. "How long until they dock?" 20 minutes, maybe less," came the reply. Reed looked at his team, then at the ship. "At Reckoning. We're not giving this to the Alliance. They'll either lock it away or use it to control their own people." "What's the alternative?" Miller asked. "We can't fight off 6 cruisers." Reed's eyes hardened. "We take the ship. Now." What followed was organized chaos. Essential supplies were loaded aboard Reckoning, while critical research data was transferred to secure storage. The team worked frantically, aware that Alliance forces were minutes away. "The ship's not ready for human crew," Wilson protested as they rushed through final preparations. "The life support systems haven't been fully tested." "No choice now," Reed said, helping her through the airlock. "We either leave with it or lose everything we've worked for." As the last of the core team boarded, Alliance ships docked at the outer facility airlocks. Through security feeds, they watched armed soldiers pour in. "All essential personnel aboard," Miller reported from the ship's bridge, a space that had somehow configured itself into a functional command center despite being incomplete in their designs. Reed took his place at what could only be called the captain's position. "Start the engines." Nothing happened. "The drive isn't responding," Miller said, frantically working the controls. White stared at the main console, where a message appeared. "Coordinates. It wants to know where we're going," he said. Reed had no time to consider the implications. Alliance forces were cutting through the inner doors. Anywhere but here. The ship hummed to life. Around them, the hangar filled with a strange light as energy fields activated. The Alliance soldiers burst through the final door, weapons raised, just as Reckoning began to move. Officer Parker watched in fury as the dark ship rose from its berth. Her soldiers fired, but the energy bolts dissipated harmlessly against shields that shouldn't have existed. The vessel turned, graceful despite its size, and then simply vanished. Inside Reckoning, the crew was thrown to the deck as reality itself seemed to tear around them. They were jumping to unknown space in an untested ship with a quantum core that seemed to have a mind of its own. And somewhere in the vast darkness between stars, something ancient stirred in response. The jump ended with a violent shudder. Warning lights flashed across every console as Reckoning stabilized itself in normal space. The crew, thrown about during the transition, picked themselves up from the deck. Status report, Reed called out, wiping blood from a cut on his forehead. Miller checked the systems, main power at 80% and holding. Hull integrity intact. But I have no idea where we are. White stared at the navigation display, trying to match the star patterns with known maps. We're somewhere in the outer rim, far beyond Alliance space. His voice dropped. How did we jump this far? The drive shouldn't be capable of this distance. Reed moved to the main viewport. The darkness of space spread before them, sprinkled with unfamiliar stars. But something else caught his eye. Distant flashes of light, like lightning during a storm. Magnify that sector, he ordered. The view zoomed in, revealing a horrifying scene. A small planet orbited a red dwarf star. Around that planet, a battle rage. Or rather, a slaughter. 7 large ships surrounded a handful of smaller vessels. The large ships were unmistakable, the angular, blade-like design of Dominion warships. The smaller ships appeared civilian, desperately trying to flee the planet. As they watched, one of the civilian ships erupted in flames, torn apart by Dominion weapons. The debris scattered into space, glittering briefly in the red star's light. Those are colony ships, Wilson whispered. Evacuation vessels. Another explosion. Another ship destroyed. Hundreds of lives snuffed out in an instant. Reed's jaw tightened. The Dominion is attacking a civilian colony. Where are we exactly? White worked the navigation system. If I'm reading this correctly, this is Halden's world. Small mining colony, independent. No strategic value. Then why is the Dominion destroying it? Miller asked. Because they can, Reed said grimly. This is what they do. What the Alliance refuses to see. On the viewport, another civilian ship exploded. Only 2 remained, desperately maneuvering toward open space. Reed stared at the carnage, then at his small crew. We have to help them. Wilson looked at him in shock. There are 7 Dominion warships out there. We're untested, undermanned, and have no idea how half our systems work. We can't just watch them die, Reed insisted. Before anyone could argue further, the ship hummed. The word protect appeared on the main console. I think, White said slowly, the ship agrees with the captain. Reed hesitated only a moment longer. Take us in. All power to engines and shields. Reckoning moved like nothing they had ever seen. The ship accelerated at speeds that should have crushed them, yet they felt nothing. The inertial dampeners, systems they hadn't even finished installing, worked perfectly. The Dominion ships didn't notice them at first, focused on their prey. By the time their sensors detected the approaching vessel, Reckoning was already upon them. They're hailing us, Miller reported. A harsh voice filled the bridge. Unknown vessel, this is Commander Brock of the Dominion fleet. This is a military operation. Leave immediately or be destroyed. Reed stepped forward. This is Captain Jack Reed. You are attacking civilians. Stand down or face the consequences. Laughter came through the comm. 1 ship against 7. Your courage is admirable, but foolish. Show them our response, the commander ordered someone off-screen. On the viewport, they watched as the largest Dominion ship turned its weapons away from the fleeing colonists and toward Reckoning. Energy gathered at the tip of its main cannon. Braced for impact, Reed shouted. The Dominion weapon fired, a blinding beam of destructive energy hurtling toward them. It struck Reckoning's shields, shields that glowed blue on impact. But they didn't fail. Instead, the energy seemed to flow around the ship, contained by fields that pulsed with increasing brightness. The shields are absorbing the attack, White said in amazement. They're not just blocking it. They're capturing the energy. On the console, new words appeared. Return fire. Reed looked at his crew, then back at the screen showing the Dominion ships still pursuing the last civilian vessels. His decision was immediate. Yes, he said firmly. Return fire. Reckoning's hull shifted, panels realigning to form what could only be described as a weapon port. The energy that had been absorbed now gathered there, glowing with intense light. When it fired, the beam that erupted from Reckoning wasn't just powerful, it was devastating. It cut through space in a brilliant blue streak, striking the lead Dominion ship. The vessel didn't just take damage, it simply ceased to exist, vaporized in an instant. Complete silence fell over Reckoning's bridge. Even the Dominion forces seemed frozen in shock. What did we just do? Miller whispered. Before anyone could answer, the remaining Dominion ships broke formation, turning their full attention, and their weapons, toward Reckoning. The real battle was about to begin. The Dominion ships attacked as one, energy weapons blazing across space toward Reckoning. Reed gripped his chair as the impact sent tremors through the ship. The shields held, rippling with blue light as they absorbed each blast. They're concentrating fire on our port side, Miller reported, his fingers dancing across the controls. Shield energy at 120% and climbing. How is that possible? Wilson asked. White studied the readings with wide eyes. The quantum core is converting the attack energy and feeding it back into our systems. They're literally making us stronger by firing on us. On the main display, the word QONT-RATACK pulsed with increasing urgency. Target their weapon systems only, Reed ordered. Let's give the civilians time to escape. Reckoning moved with impossible grace for a vessel its size, turning to face the Dominion fleet. Weapon ports opened along its hull, each glowing with gathered energy. When they fired, it wasn't a single massive blast like before, but dozens of smaller precision beams. Each beam found its target with perfect accuracy, slicing through the Dominion ship's weapon arrays. Two enemy vessels spun out of control, their engines damaged by secondary explosions. Another drifted dead in space, all systems offline. The civilian ships are jumping to safety, White reported, relief evident in his voice. Reed nodded, but his attention was on the largest Dominion vessel, a massive dreadnought that had just arrived through a jump point. It dwarfed Reckoning, its hull bristling with weapons. Incoming transmission, Miller said. The viewport shifted to show a hard-faced man in a Dominion admiral's uniform. I am Admiral Kane of the Dominion First Fleet. You have interfered in Imperial business and destroyed Imperial property. Identify yourself immediately. Reed stood. This is Captain Jack Reed. You were slaughtering civilians. We stopped you. Kane's eyes narrowed. Your ship design is unknown to our database. What system are you from? That doesn't matter, Reed replied. What matters is that we're not going to let you continue this massacre. Kane smiled coldly. Brave words. Let's see if your mysterious vessel can match them. He cut the transmission. The dreadnought's hull split open, revealing a massive central cannon. Energy gathered at its core, building to levels that made their sensors scream warnings. That's a Nova cannon, White said, his voice shaking. It can crack a planet's crust. Wilson looked up from her station. Our shields can't absorb that much energy at once. On the console, a new message appeared. EVA SciFi action recommended. Reed didn't hesitate. Everyone hold on. The moment the dreadnought fired, Reckoning moved. But it wasn't normal movement. The ship seemed to bend space around itself, sliding sideways through reality as the massive energy beam passed through where they had been a split second before. The crew felt strange, as if they were in two places at once for that brief moment. Then reality snapped back, and they were behind the dreadnought. "What just happened?" Miller asked, looking ill. "The quantum core," White whispered. "It created a localized fold in spacetime. We didn't move. Space moved around us." Reed had no time to consider the implications. Target their engines. "Let's end this." Reckoning fired again, this time concentrating all its gathered energy into a single point on the dreadnought's engine section. The beam punched through shields and armor alike, striking the vessel's power core. The resulting explosion lit up space like a newborn star. The dreadnought didn't just break apart. It disintegrated, scattered into countless fragments that burned briefly before fading to darkness. The remaining Dominion ships fled, jumping away to safety. As the adrenaline faded, Reed looked around at his stunned crew. They had just destroyed the flagship of a Dominion fleet. With one ship. In minutes. "We should check for survivors," he said quietly. "See if anyone on the planet needs help." As Reckoning moved toward the colony world, a message from the surface reached them. It was filled with thanks, with questions about who they were and where they had come from. "What do we tell them?" Miller asked. Reed considered this. "The truth. That we're here to help. Nothing more for now." But even as they began rescue operations, Reed knew the truth would spread. Word of a mysterious ship that appeared from nowhere to challenge the Dominion would travel quickly. The story would grow with each telling, and somewhere in Dominion space, Admiral Kane's second-in-command was already reporting to his superiors about the encounter with an unknown vessel of unprecedented power, a vessel that had destroyed their most powerful warship with apparent ease. The Dominion would not forget. They would not forgive. And they would be coming. Word of Reckoning spread faster than any ship could travel. On 100 worlds, people whispered about the mysterious vessel that had appeared from nowhere to challenge the Dominion. Each story grew more fantastic than the last. Some said it was a ghost ship crewed by the spirits of those killed by the Dominion. Others claimed it was a weapon built by a secret alliance of conquered worlds. The truth remained with Reed and his small crew as they traveled from system to system, helping where they could. They rescued stranded ships, delivered supplies to blockaded colonies, and occasionally engaged Dominion forces when necessary. With each encounter, they learned more about their ship's capabilities and its limitations. "The quantum core needs time to recharge after major engagements," White explained during one of their regular briefings. "It's gathering energy from somewhere else. Not just our universe, I think." "From where, then?" Reed asked. White hesitated. "Based on these readings, possibly from parallel realities." The implications were staggering, but they had little time to explore them. 6 weeks after their first battle, long-range sensors detected a massive fleet gathering at the edge of Dominion space. 50 ships, Miller reported grimly. "The largest fleet I've ever seen. They're not hiding their movements. They want us to know they're coming." Reed studied the tactical display. "They're hunting us." "We should run," Wilson suggested. "Find a remote system, power down, and hide." Reed shook his head. "They won't stop. And while they're looking for us, they'll destroy anyone they suspect of helping us." The crew fell silent, knowing he was right. The rescued colonists from 3 worlds now lived aboard Reckoning in hastily converted cargo bays. Each had stories of Dominion cruelty, of worlds burned when they resisted. "There's something else," White said, pulling up new data. "Alliance ships have been detected moving into this sector too. Not as many as the Dominion, but enough to cause trouble." "Parker," Reed muttered. "She must have convinced command that we're too dangerous to leave alone." Trapped between 2 forces, each determined to capture or destroy Reckoning, Reed faced an impossible decision. They couldn't fight both fleets, But they couldn't keep running forever either. As if sensing his thoughts, the ship's main console lit up with a new message. Alternative Story available. White moved to the console, eyes widening as data flooded the screen. I don't even understand half of this, but it looks like Reckoning is suggesting we use the quantum core in a way we haven't tried before. The plan was audacious, dangerous, perhaps suicidal. But as Reed studied it, he began to see the logic. The quantum core could do more than power weapons or drive systems. Used properly, it could affect reality on a fundamental level. "Can we do this?" he asked White. The scientist ran his hand through his hair. "Theoretically, yes, but the power requirements are enormous. We'd need to get dangerously close to a star." Reed looked around at his crew, at the people who had followed him into this strange journey. "Put it to a vote. I won't order anyone to take this risk." The vote was unanimous. Even the rescued colonists, when told of the plan, offered their support. They had seen too much suffering at Dominion hands to choose safety over a chance at real change. 3 days later, Reckoning took position near a blue giant star at the center of a disputed sector. Both fleets, Dominion and Alliance, were closing in, their sensors easily detecting the ship that made no attempt to hide. "We're being hailed by both fleets," Miller reported. "They're ordering us to surrender." Reed ignored them. "Begin the power collection sequence." Reckoning extended massive energy collectors from its hull, drawing directly from the star's radiation. The quantum core hummed, growing brighter as it absorbed more power than it was designed to handle. Warning indicators flashed across every console. The ship shuddered as systems strained under the massive energy flow. "Core at 200% capacity," White called out, his voice tight with tension. 300, 400. The pursuing fleets had arrived, spreading out to surround Reckoning. The first shots were fired, impacting against shields that flickered dangerously under the strain. "Core at maximum capacity," White shouted over the noise of overloading systems. "It's now or never." Reed took a deep breath. "Activate the core pulse." For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then reality itself shifted. A wave of energy expanded from Reckoning in all directions, visible as a ripple in spacetime. It passed through the attacking ships, through the nearby planets, through everything in its path. But instead of destroying, it transformed. As the wave touched each ship, their weapon systems simply ceased to function. The energy that powered destructive weapons was redirected, converted, changed at the quantum level. When it was over, both fleets drifted in space, powerless to attack, but otherwise unharmed. And through every communication system in range came a single message, broadcast in every known language. "This ends now." The aftermath was nothing short of extraordinary. For 3 days, Reckoning remained at the center of the now powerless fleets, broadcasting the simple message to both sides. "Come aboard. Unarmed. We need to talk." Reed stood in the newly formed meeting chamber, watching as the leaders of both factions entered. Admiral Kane of the Dominion walked stiffly, his face a mask of barely controlled rage. Opposite him came Admiral Blake of the Alliance, whom Reed had served under for years. Behind Blake walked Lisa Parker, her eyes taking in every detail of the ship she had hunted. "What have you done to our ships?" Kane demanded as soon as the doors closed. "Neutralize your weapons," Reed replied calmly. "Nothing more. Your life support, engines, and other systems remain functional." Blake stepped forward. "Reed, you've stolen Alliance property, violated at least 30 regulations, and now you're holding 2 fleets hostage. What exactly do you hope to achieve?" "An end to the fighting," Reed said simply. "The Dominion has been systematically destroying worlds at the edge of known space. The Alliance has been pretending it isn't happening. Both of you are wrong." Kane sneered. "The strong rule. The weak serve or perish. This is the natural order." "There is nothing natural about genocide," Reed countered. He gestured, and the ship displayed images of the colonies the Dominion had destroyed. The room filled with the recorded voices of survivors, their stories of horror and loss echoing around the assembled leaders. Some of the Dominion officers looked away. Others remained stone-faced. The Alliance representatives watched in growing horror, many clearly seeing the truth for the first time. "You knew," Parker said quietly to Blake. "You knew and did nothing." The Alliance admiral had no answer. Reed let the silence stretch before speaking again. "Reckoning has the power to disable every weapon in this sector of the galaxy. We've proven that. But that's not a solution. That's just another form of control." He moved to the center of the room where a holographic display showed the quantum core, pulsing with energy. This ship wasn't built as a weapon. The civilization that created these plans was dying. They left them behind as a gift, a way to prevent what happened to them from happening to others. White stepped forward, continuing the explanation. "The quantum core doesn't just generate power. It creates connections, bridges between different points in space-time, and potentially between different minds." Kane laughed harshly. "You expect us to believe that?" In response, Reckoning's lights dimmed. The quantum core's image grew brighter, expanding to fill the room with a soft blue glow. And then, everyone felt it. A gentle touch at the edge of their consciousness. Not intrusive, not controlling, just connecting. For a brief moment, Kane felt the fear of the colonists as they watched Dominion ships approach their homes. Blake experienced the rage and helplessness of those whose warnings had been ignored. And all of them, Dominion and Alliance alike, sensed each other's thoughts, fears, and hopes. The connection lasted only seconds before fading. The room remained silent as each person processed what they had experienced. "That was just a fraction of what's possible," Reed said quietly. "The quantum core can create a network, a way for all species to truly understand each other. Not mind control, not forced unity. Just comprehension." "Impossible," someone whispered. "We thought so too," Miller said. "Until we built it." Over the next hours, the discussion continued. Arguments flared and subsided. Accusations were made and acknowledged. But slowly, something changed. The very act of being in Reckoning's presence, of feeling the potential of the quantum core, shifted perspectives. 2 days later, representatives from both fleets stood together on Reckoning's bridge as Reed prepared to make an announcement to the galaxy. "We stand at a crossroads," he said, his voice carried by the ship to every world within range. "For too long, we've allowed fear and misunderstanding to drive us apart, to justify cruelty and indifference. Today, that changes." He explained the quantum network, a system that would allow instant communication between all worlds, all peoples. Not forced connection, but the opportunity for true understanding. "Reckoning will no longer be a warship," Reed concluded. "It will be the foundation of something new, something better." The core hummed as it began its work, sending tendrils of quantum energy to communication hubs throughout the galaxy. Within days, worlds that had never spoken began to converse. Enemies started to understand each other's positions. Not agreement, not yet, but the beginning of comprehension. And above it all, Reckoning moved through the stars, no longer feared but revered. The ship that had made the galaxy tremble in fear now made it tremble with possibility. On the observation deck, Reed stood alone, watching distant stars. White joined him, handing him a cup of coffee. "Do you think it will last?" the scientist asked. Reed sipped his coffee. "I don't know. Understanding doesn't guarantee peace, but it's a start." "And what about us? The ship?" Reed smiled slightly. "I think our journey is just beginning." Below them, the quantum core pulsed with steady light, connecting worlds and minds across the vastness of space. And somewhere, in the data streams that flowed through the ship's systems, a simple message repeated. "Risiko oning kom palit, rebuilding initiated."